Well, good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. We're having that same problem that we had last week. Glad to hear it. It is so great to be here with you this morning. My name is Justin Wheaton, and I am so glad that I get to deliver this message this morning because I really love being able to proclaim the message of God's inspired and inerrant word. And because Rosh Hashanah is coming soon, also known as the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah, it's coming up on September 22nd. Pastor Steve asked me to give a sermon on something having to do with trumpets. So I was racking my brain trying to figure out what the best topic for this would be. And there are several psalms that talk about trumpets, that mention praising God with trumpets. Psalm 98:6 tells us, with trumpets and the sound of the horn, shout joyfully before the King, the Lord. The high holiday itself, it's instituted in Leviticus 23. Adonai spoke with Moses and said, in the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, you shall have a rest, a remainder by the blowing of trumpets. A holy convocation. You shall not do any laborious work, but you shall present an offering by fire to Adonai. But in the end, I decided to go with the ultimate trumpet passage, the one that, even if you aren't a believer, you've probably heard of, the fall of Jericho from Joshua 6. So I've titled this message, Shout, for the Lord has given you this city. Hariu ki natan Adonai lachem ha'ir. Now, before I get into Joshua 6, I need to give some quick background for the events that are leading up to this chapter. And Pastor Steve did a really great job just now, so I'm going to try to add on to that. But before I do that, let me open in a quick word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for allowing me to preach here today. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to share your word. And as I give this message, I pray that you give me wisdom and speak through me. My hope, Lord, is always that we come out of this with a greater love for you and a greater love for your word. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. So while I go ahead and give some background information, go ahead and open up your Bibles with me to Joshua chapter 6. So the book of Joshua is the 6th book in the Hebrew Bible. It's the culmination of God's covenant promise to Abraham that his descendants would possess the land of Canaan. In most English Bibles, it's classified as the first of the historical books. And this is not because the Torah isn't historical, but rather because with Joshua, the Israelites are finally in the long-awaited promised land. In the Hebrew Bible categorization, the book belongs to the prophets section, the Nevi'im, but more specifically, the former prophets. And while Joshua is not one of the prophets like Isaiah or Jeremiah, those are called the latter prophets. He speaks prophetically on numerous occasions. And remember, a prophet is not just someone who gives future prophecies of the end times, though they can do that. The primary role of a prophet is to speak for God, which Joshua does. And it's difficult to date exactly when the events would have happened. But following a possible dating of the Exodus, the events occurred at either the end of the 15th century or the mid-13th century, after the 40-year wilderness wanderings. And authorship is a little difficult as well to determine because the book is anonymous. It doesn't tell us who wrote it. The Talmud in Baba Batra credits Joshua with the writing of the majority of the book, with Eleazar the priest writing about Joshua's death, and then Phinehas, his son, writing about Eleazar's death. However, it's less likely that Joshua himself wrote the book for a number of reasons, or at least the final composition of the book. The book itself records that things it has things in it that would make it more likely to have been written or completed sometime after Joshua. So for example, in numerous places, the book describes something and then explains how it has an influence to this day. And that indicates to us that these things were written down after their initial introduction by Joshua. Now let's quickly go over the events that led up to Joshua 6. So this is the world of Joshua. I wish I had that laser pointer. I was just kidding, but I mean, I could take if I would use it. Thank you. Perfect. So this is the world of Joshua, and these are the time periods. So, as you can see, there are three big superpowers fighting over possession of the land between right here. We've got Egypt, who at that time controlled the land of Canaan. They're coming up from the south. We've got the Mitannians, who are coming over from the northeast. We've got the Hittites, a massive superpower coming down from the north, all fighting over this land between. And on top of that, we've got the sea peoples who are coming over from Greece. And the Philistines were a part of this group of sea peoples. This group is going to cause a lot of trouble for the Hittites. And they're also going to cause a lot of trouble for the city of Ugarit, which is about right there. They're going to, and then they'll come and almost conquer Egypt as well. The Philistines are then going to settle in Canaan, and then they're going to control the coastal region, the Philistine alluvial plain, up until, for centuries, throughout the biblical's historical periods, until they're completely wiped out by the Neo-Babylonians, the same ones who destroyed Solomon's temple. Now, we're zoomed in to the area of Egypt and Canaan. And we're going to trace the events of the Exodus. And like with everything, there's always many proposals. But ultimately, I'm going to utilize the route proposed by Egyptologist James Hoffmeyer for the route for the crossing of the Sea of Reeds. Well, this isn't working like I thought it would. It was supposed to be a movable line, but that's fine. So it's not going to look like I planned. But so, the Israelites are going to leave Egypt from the very lush area of P. Ramses right here. They're living in Goshen. And they're going to travel south to Sukkot. It's another very irrigated, cultivated area. Both of these are very lush regions. And they're going to be careful to avoid the Egyptian outposts along the coastal highway that goes along like this. And then they're going to turn from Sukkot, they're going to turn north and probably cross the Sea of Reeds. Here's a picture of Goshen. They're probably going to cross the Sea of Reeds at the Balak Lakes, right here, one of the proposals. And then they're going to come down the coast of what we call the Red Sea. And they're going to continue south through the desert, through the canyons, through the rocky crags of the Sinai Peninsula, all the way to Mount Sinai, which is possibly Jebel Musa. And they're going to remain here for about a year. And then they'll move north through the desert to Eilat. And then north again to the ancient oasis of Kadesh Barnea, where Moses would send out the spies to spy out the land. And also where the people would rebel against God and then be punished to wander in the land, wander around this area, the wilderness, until the Exodus generation dies out, except for Joshua and Caleb, two of the spies, who remained faithful to God. Now I'm going to switch maps here. We've moved east to Canaan. And this is going to show a little bit more of the geography. So now we're moving from Kadesh Barnea down over here. And we're going to move east and travel through the giant canyon right here. The giant canyon called Nahal Zin. And they're going to continue east. So there's the Nahal Zin. They're going to continue east to Punon, where they were refused passage by the king of Edom. And so they turn south, and they're going to go down to Elat, down this way. And they're going to travel around the kingdom of Edom, the land of Edom. And they're going to start coming up this way, and they're going to move along the King's Highway. They head north through the massive Zered Canyon right here. This canyon it's where it fed, whenever it flooded, it fed water to the southern region of the Dead Sea. And from there, they're going to continue north. They're going to continue upward, crossing over along the King's Highway, crossing over the Arnon Canyon, which looks like this. And then they're going to finally stop at Mount Nebo, right here. This is a view from Mount Nebo. And here, this is where Moses, who had sinned against God, and he wasn't allowed to enter the land either. God is going to allow him to come up to the top of this mountain and give him one last look of the promised land, the land of Canaan, the land which his people that he's been leading for 40 years are about to enter into, fulfilling the long-awaited promise to Abraham that his descendants were going to inherit the land. So just think for a second. Moses is standing up here on Mount Nebo. He can see all of this. Jericho is right up in front here. He can see the Dead Sea. He can see the wilderness from there, where David would tend his sheep and then where he runs to fight against Goliath. He can see the wilderness where Jesus is tempted by the devil. He can see all of the land where the kings of Israel and Judah would fight over land, or where they would battle with the Moabites or the Philistines. He can see everything from up there. So you can just imagine what he's thinking about his people are going to be able to do when they're in the land, to live in this very lush, beautiful region. Well, this is a little deserty, but there's beautiful, lush areas. From there, and then Moses is going to die there and be buried in an unknown, unmarked grave. So from there, they're going to continue, and then they're going to start to descend now. Now, the Israelites are led by Joshua, Moses' successor. From here, they're going to go down into Abel Shittim, right here. And then from there, they're going to cross over the Jordan, right here, to the region of Jericho. And they're going to enter the Promised Land. Now, the Israelites are in view of Jericho. Now that the Israelites are in view of Jericho, let me give a brief overview of chapters 1 through 5 of Joshua. So after Moses' death on Mount Nebo, God told Joshua, Moses' successor, to get the Israelites ready to cross the Jordan River into the land of Canaan from Shittim. Moses, Aaron, and the generation of the Exodus had passed away. So now it was time for their children, and Miriam, now it was time for their children to take the land, this new generation. But before they did, God told Joshua to make sure to keep all the commandments that Moses had given to them in the wilderness, and that he reiterated to this new generation in Deuteronomy. So Joshua told the leaders of the 12 tribes to gather their people and get ready to cross the Jordan River. He also, at the same time, sent out spies to spy out the region of Jericho, the city of Jericho. So here's a reconstruction by Barry Beitzel on what the city may have looked like. When they arrived, the spies, they hid themselves in the house of a prostitute named Rahab, who had heard, she had heard of the incredible acts that the Lord had done for the parents of the new generation when he brought them out of Egypt with a strong arm, proving to them that the Pharaoh is not a god at all and the Egyptian gods are nothing. They're not even gods at all. The patron deity of Jericho was likely Yarik, the moon god. Yarik-ho, Yarik. So Rahab, professing faith in Adonai, is very significant. So the spies hid from the king of the city in Rahab's house. And in return, when they conquered the city, they were going to spare her and her family. When they got back to Shittim, Joshua mustered the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant, where God's presence dwelt. And the soldiers from the 12 tribes, he mustered them as well, and they're getting ready to go up and take the city. When the priests got to the Jordan River, as the ark approached it, the river split, and there was dry ground. And this may sound familiar. There are many things like this. We're getting a parallel with Joshua to Moses parting the Sea of Reeds. And after they crossed, God commanded Joshua to circumcise all the males to remind them of their covenant and that they were his people. So now we're on a map of Jericho. Chapter 5 ends with Joshua near Jericho, where he receives a visit from the commander of the army of the Lord. And I wish I could go more into this, but there just isn't time. But in short, this figure, this divine figure, could be an angel, or maybe even a theophany from the pre-incarnate Son, the second person of the Trinity, who would later take on flesh as Jesus of Nazareth. What is clear, though, is that Joshua is told to take the sandals off of his feet because he is on holy ground, which again parallels the events of Moses at the burning bush, where he is told to take off the sandals because he's on holy ground. And this seals the deal for us. It makes it certain that Joshua is the worthy successor to Moses. So with all of that background in mind, let's get into Joshua 6. And I apologize if there was too much background. I wanted to try something cool in my PowerPoint with the maps that didn't work out like I planned. But you can still imagine it tracing the route. But my hope for doing this is that it makes the Bible come alive. And it reminds you that it is historical. It describes real people in real places doing real things. Now, what I want you all to take away from this message today is to trust God because he is faithful. So here's a picture of the tell of Jericho. Now, full disclosure, I started out, when I was working on this PowerPoint, I was doing it very late last night. And I started out translating the stuff on my own, but then I gave up and I just put NASB in there. So let me go ahead and read verses 1 through 5. Now Jericho was tightly shut because of the sons of Israel. No one went out and no one came in. But the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have handed Jericho over to you with its king and the valiant warriors, and you shall march around the city, all the men of war circling the city once. You shall do so for 6 days. Also, 7 priests shall carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. And then on the 7th day, you shall march around the city 7 times. And the priests shall blow the trumpets. And it shall be when they make a long blast with the shofar, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, every one straight ahead. God is giving Joshua and the people a command here that's going to require their complete trust in him. I also want to mention here that numbers are very significant, are hugely important in the ancient Near East. Numbers such as 4, 120, 110, 40, 6, 3, etc. were often given symbolic meaning. Every time you see a number in the Bible, it's worth taking a second, taking a step back, and seeing if there might be any significance to it. In the verses I just read, you may have noticed the number 7, which was mentioned numerous times. We have 7 priests carrying 7 trumpets, marching around the city 7 times over 7 days. And then on the 7th day, the walls will fall and will be given into the hands of the Israelites. 7 is one of the most common symbolic numbers found throughout the Bible, from the beginning of the Old Testament in Genesis to the very end of the New Testament in Revelation. And it often symbolizes completion or perfection. In 6 days, God created everything, and on the 7th day, it was complete. And this is mirrored in the work week. John records Jesus giving 7 I am statements, proving his divinity. Passover ends after 7 days. There are 7 feasts, and there's tons more examples. In Joshua 6, we have the people marching around the wall, around the city, for 6 days. And then on the 7th, the act will be complete, and the walls will fall down. The use of 7 here also corresponds, I think, with the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is a 7-day celebration of God's defeat of the enemies of his people in Egypt. Just as God was faithful to the Exodus generation when he defeated the Egyptians with his strong arm, he's going to be faithful to the new generation in their battle with Jericho. Now, continuing the story, verses 6 through 11 tell us, "So Joshua, the son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, 'Take up the ark of the covenant and have 7 priests carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark of the Lord.' Then he said to the people, 'Go forward and march around the city, and the armed men shall go on ahead of the ark of the Lord.' And it was so, that when Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Lord went forward and blew the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. And the armed men went ahead of the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard came after the ark, while they continued to blow the trumpets. But Joshua commanded the people, saying, 'You shall not shout, nor let your voice be heard, nor let a word proceed from your mouth until the day I tell you, shout. Then you shall shout.' So he had the ark of the Lord taken around the city, circling it once. Then they came into the camp and spent the night in the camp." After hearing God's command, Joshua relayed the message to the priests and the soldiers. And amazingly, they actually did exactly what God said. And it's remarkable, I think, that these people, except Joshua and Caleb, are part of the new generation of Israelites. None of their parents were alive at this point. This new generation didn't see God rescue rescue his people from slavery in Egypt. They only heard stories about it from their parents. They have no idea if God is actually going to make the walls fall down by the sound of their trumpets and shouts alone. But they followed Joshua's words exactly. And this incredible faith from the new generation who never saw God's amazing deeds in Egypt is contrasted by the previous generation who witnessed everything but grumbled against God at every turn. Take the spies from both generations, for example. In the parents' generation, the spies were sent by Moses to spy out the land of Canaan. And when they got back to the Israelite camp, they were afraid, and they convinced the people to rebel against God and Moses and Aaron because they didn't have faith that God would defeat their enemies, except for Joshua and Caleb, who remained faithful and knew that God would defeat whoever he wanted to. In Numbers 14, all of the Israelites complained, and they said, "Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become plunder. Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt?" Then they tried to stone Moses and Aaron, but were saved by God at the last second. And this act of rebellion is what sealed it, why they weren't allowed into the promised land. The whole generation was punished by having to die off, and their children would be able to enter the land. Now let's look at the spies from the new generation. They went and spied out the land of the city of Jericho and never once doubted that God would defeat their enemies. When they got back to the Israelite camp and said to Joshua, "Surely the Lord has given all the land into our hands. Moreover, all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before us." What a difference between the generations. The people who had only heard stories and never saw anything had more faith in God than the people who physically witnessed God's great miracles and acts. And this should make us take a step back and examine ourselves. Would we have enough trust in God to march around a city and shout to gain victory? Do we have the same kind of faith in God in our lives today that these people have had when they attacked Jericho? My wife, Kaylin, and I talk about this all the time. Whatever happens in our lives, whatever hardships we encounter, God is always there with us. His timing for things is never our timing, but He's always faithful. Verses 12 through 14 continue. Now Joshua got up early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. Then the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark of the Lord went on continually and blew the trumpets, and the armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard came after the ark, while they continued to blow the shofars. So the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp, and they did the same for 6 days. It's easy to get excited and fired up to do something for a short time. The feelings stop eventually, pretty quickly. But the Israelites, their unwavering obedience and trust in God continued for another 5 days. And this is even more remarkable because remember, nothing has happened to the city yet. They have no idea if the walls are actually going to fall down. But Joshua gave them the command from God to march around the city, blowing trumpets, shouting, and then staying silent for the rest of the day. And they never doubted God or faltered once. This is an example that we should want to follow in our own lives. In verses 15 through 21, we finally hear what happens on the seventh day. The text tells us, I'm going to go ahead and switch backgrounds here. This is a picture from Gustave Doré of the fall of Jericho. Then on the seventh day, they got up early at the dawning of the day and marched around the city in the same way 7 times. Only on that day did they march around the city 7 times. And here's the city that they're marching around. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They're marching around it 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests blew the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. But the city shall be designated for destruction, and everything that is in it belongs to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in the house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. But as for you, only keep yourselves from the things designated for destruction, so that you do not covet them and take some of the designated things and turn the camp of Israel into something designated for destruction and bring disaster on it." It's foreshadowing. "But all the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord." So the people shouted, and the priests blew the trumpets. And when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. So the people went up into the city, everyone straight ahead, and they took the city. They utterly destroyed everything in the city, both man and woman, young and old, and ox, sheep, and donkey, with the edge of the sword. So on the 7th day, the 7 priests and the soldiers marched around the city 7 times, blowing 7 trumpets and shouting. Joshua declares to the people, "Hariu ki natan Adonai lachem et ha'ir." Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The walls fell down exactly as God told them it would. The people trusted in God, and He was faithful to His word, as He was to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. They never got to see the fulfillment of the promise God gave to them, but they trusted in Him anyway. And the beginning of the fulfillment for the land was fulfilled with this generation, beginning with Jericho. Again, the conquest of Jericho was the first city in God's fulfillment of His covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that they would inherit the land of Canaan. Alan Millard, an Old Testament scholar, says that Jericho was an offering to God, the first fruit of the conquest. It was the first thing dedicated to God as cherem. And with that, I have to talk about what's happening in this battle. Joshua tells the people that the city and everything in it will be dedicated to destruction, or put under the ban, or devoted to destruction, whatever your translation says. Then the text says that they completely destroyed everything in the city, both man and woman, young and old, ox, sheep, and donkey. The word that is used in both of these verses is the Hebrew word cherem. And this sounds very harsh, and it was. There's no denying that. This was an intense thing. But it needs to be properly understood. Why is God commanding this? We first hear about cherem in Exodus 22, verse 20. He who sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone shall be utterly destroyed, or haremed. We then get a fuller picture of what this entails in Deuteronomy 7. And it was to occur when Israel moved into the land to possess it from the peoples living there. The nations mentioned there are the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The term harem is used in verse 3 of Deuteronomy 7 in relation to not making covenants or intermarrying with the people. Doing this would inevitably turn the people away from the worship of God to the worship of other gods, causing him to punish them for breaking their commandment, their commitment, and forsaking him. And we see throughout the Hebrew Bible, they do this a lot. That's the whole reason Israel and Judah were destroyed. To prevent this intermarrying with the foreign peoples who will cause the Israelites to worship their gods, to prevent this, Deuteronomy 7:5 says, "Their altars you will tear down, and their sacred pillars you will shatter, and their Asherahs you will cut down, and their divine images you will burn completely with fire." The ultimate purpose of harem was to dispossess, Yarash, was to dispossess the Canaanites and completely destroy or neglect everything related to the worship of the other false gods. Israel was supposed to be a holy people, a separate people, uncorrupted by the gods of the surrounding nations. This action of harem was also related to the long-term national security of the nation. Lawson Younger writes that the purpose of harem was threefold: judgment of the Canaanites, protection of the Israelites from Canaanite religious influence, and fulfillment of the patriarchal promises concerning the land. This concept of harem is going to come up a lot in the conquest, and a few times after it as well. It's important to know that the people often have an opportunity to flee. Then the remainder who choose to fight get haremed. Moreover, harem is about dismantling the gods, but it's also dismantling the people so that they can't just go and rebuild somewhere else. Harem is not conquest. It underscores God's sovereignty, his authority, and shows that he delights in rightly ordered humans. It's not about Israelite superiority. It's limited to only certain settlements and is one way that God executes judgment. But I also really want to stress, and this is also for the cities that the Israelites attacked but didn't harem. In the ancient Near East, including for the Israelites, the people used hyperbolic or exaggerated war language. I could give you numerous examples from the Assyrians where they talk exactly like this. It was a shared cultural phenomenon. And interestingly, centuries later, King Mesha of Moab is going to harem the Israelite cities that he defeats and dedicate everything of theirs to his god Chemosh. Now, I know that may not be completely satisfying on harem. There's a lot more we could talk about, and I'm happy to do so if anyone has any questions. But I just didn't have enough time to do a full dive into this. So to end the chapter, the text gives us an update on what happened to Rahab. She was at the beginning, we didn't hear from her, and now we get an update. It tells us in 22 through 27, "And Joshua said to the two men who had spied out the land, 'Go into the prostitute's house and bring the woman and all she has out of there, just as you have sworn to her.' So the young men who were spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and all she had. They also brought out all her relatives and placed them outside the camp of Israel. Then they burned the city with fire and all that was in it. Only the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. However, Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all she had, Joshua spared. And she has lived in the midst of Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Then Joshua made them take an oath at that time, saying, "Cursed before the Lord is the man who rises up and builds this city Jericho with the loss of his firstborn. He will lay its foundations, and with the loss of his youngest son, he will set up its gates." So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was in all the land. Just as the spies promised Rahab, she and her family were saved. She had incredible faith in God, whom she'd only heard stories of, when she professed faith in him over her own gods and took the spies in and saved them from her ruler. Because of this, Rahab and her family were incorporated into the people of Israel, which foreshadows all the way back in the book of Joshua the inclusion of the Gentiles into the people of God. And furthermore, Matthew's genealogy in chapter 1, Matthew 1, his genealogy of Jesus lists Rahab as the mother of Boaz, who was the ancestor of King David, who was the ancestor of Jesus the Messiah. And remember, Boaz married Ruth, another Gentile. The very last verse is one that I want to highlight. It says, "And the Lord was with Joshua." This fulfills the words from Joshua chapter 1, verses 5 through 9. It says, "No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I've been with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it and go to the right or to the left, so that you may have success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." To end this message, I want to reiterate the main point of this passage. Trust in God because he's faithful. God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that their descendants would have a land that they could call their home. God reiterated this to them time and time again. And though they never saw this fulfillment, they trusted in the Lord, and he did exactly what he said he was going to do. The conquering of Jericho is evidence that God keeps his promises. And remember, it wasn't the shouts and the trumpets that brought down the walls, it was God. The people could not have done anything without him. We need to constantly cling to the Lord. As Psalm 18, verse 2 says, "He is our rock and our fortress and our deliverer, in whom we take refuge, our shield and the horn of our salvation, our stronghold." Thank you for being here today. And even though it doesn't start until Monday, Shana Tova. Happy New Year to you all, and let me end in a word of prayer. Dear Lord, I pray that I was able to do justice to you and to your word this morning. I hope that I have inspired all of us to put our complete trust in you, because you are the only one we can depend on and who will always be there. Lord, we love you more than anything, and we just praise your goodness and your greatness. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.